Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
Yeah, but can we keep the part where I yell, more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got, 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to start with that?
Here we go. Exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with the Smoky Bar.
No. It's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch. And it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
All right, we should be live.
All right, welcome everyone. It is the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin, and over on the other side of the screen, as always, is Jeff.
Hey, how's it going all?
So tonight we are joined by Vellic, who is the host of Mask and Mimicry, which is a show that appears on the channel Smart Gamer Network. So Vellic, go ahead and tell everybody hello.
Hello.
Well, welcome to the channel. I appreciate you coming tonight. We were doing a little bit of pre-chat before. It was always fun. So we like to kind of come in here and get our fans introduced to you. And we talked a little bit about this before, but one of the questions we like to get into is how you got into the hobby originally. It's kind of like a little throwback to anyone else who's trying to get into the hobby now. So what were those first games like for you, and how'd you find your gaming group?
I have kind of a weird and drawn out approach. My first time playing D&D was like first edition.
Okay.
When we had, but it was very much like a friend found it in the closet and we had no idea what we were doing or what it was type scenario. So we played once and we're just like, oh, this is weird, and then never touched it. Then, I got into role playing online way back in the day with AOL chat room. And at some point in amongst doing that and moving into either, I think it was early high school. I don't think it was middle school, but going into freshman year high school, made some friends that reintroduced me, because I think it was middle school when I first did first ed and had no idea what it was. And then in early high school, met some friends, reintroduced me back to D, and we did our first game there where one person kind of knew what they were doing a little bit, and it was second edition, and we didn't really know what we were doing, but we were fumbling around, and to the point no one was the DM. We were just kind of messing around. We did a game, and then we decided let's do this thing where we each take turns DMing, and that didn't work at all because I ended up DMing, and then one person after us ended up DMing, and he ended up just deciding that we were all going to be on this island that was covered in glittering wealth and gemstones and stuff everywhere. And so we all left there filthy rich. And then we stopped playing those characters.
Because everybody remembers it was always the quest for money. Money and
items, yeah. Oh man,
which I can't say I'm innocent, because in my game I gave them mithril. I was like, mithril's awesome. That's what we're gonna do. It's my first game running ever as DM, and you go into a cave of mithril. Surely you're just gonna kill the monsters and not steal it. No one would do that.
Lessons learned. Yeah, it's funny how those all go. All of our early games were like that too, where it was always let's give out these cool items, and everyone's out to get them. And what's the cool thing that happens this time? Oh yeah, you made a ton of money. Woo!
I went against the grain, Jeff. You remember my first game?
I'm trying to remember. I have a game in mind that might be your first game, but I don't think it is.
It was the one with all the angels, and I cut off both your arms.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. The Sakara game where you decided to bring prophecy in the mix and take all my arms as a monk. Yeah, thanks
That's
for that.
right, yeah. I've been a brutal DM from the get-go. I didn't do out anything. I just killed some players with it. Like,
I imagine you kicked a lot of things.
A lot of headbutts from there on out.
it was.
We had an odd tendency with a lot of early games to have. There was always like somebody had a character everyone hated somehow. It was always the same player, but it was usually like the same two players, and like one of them or someone else had a character that everyone else hated, and probably ended up being dead by the end of the game. Which is a funny juxtaposition to like party killed them off. Like one guy made a gnome, and the gnome absolutely had to talk super fast and super hyperactive all the time, like some kind of crazed, drugged out troll doll. And was just like, I'm going to talk like this the entire time, everything that we're doing, blah blah blah. And that's what he did the entire game. And after about 2 sessions, that character died. In my defense, I didn't have anything to do with it, but the rest of the party decided no. We're not.
But you didn't stop it from happening, is what you're trying to say.
No, I did not.
My party just wishes my character's voice was all they hated him for. Like,
Dustin has a special talent of picking characters specifically to get under people's skin. Like, I think he is that guy.
I am that guy. They just haven't killed me yet.
Yeah. Maybe that's something we need to start doing. Almost happened in the recent game. That's funny though.
Well, it's an interesting comparison to like that was ages ago. I'm in like my mid 30s now, so the games that I participate in and run in are very different than they were then. Everyone in my current group is very not completely anti PvP, but for the most part, let's see, how do we, if there is an issue, we're like, how do we resolve this without coming bloodshed? To the point of maybe even like sometimes talking out of character and be like, okay, so how do we deal with this? Or if we're going to come to blows, are we okay with however this throws down?
A responsible way of doing things, you're saying.
Right.
Sharing the space with
adults.
Respect.
Like adults.
We try, because we did do one short series of games, kind of a short multi-shot, like a 3-shot game, where the DM decided, all right, I want to play a game where you're all dead and you're in the afterlife, and you're going to be trying to come back to life. And so for some reason, all of us decided that we were going to make assholes. Because we're clearly in hell, so we're all jerks.
Well, you have to be, because otherwise you wouldn't want to come back. So you're.
And we were just like, oh, well, clearly we're in this awful place, so we must all be jerks, I guess. And that was probably the closest we came. Like, people were on several occasions like drawing weapons at each other. Like, all right, it's just a matter of how long we go before we kill each other.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Me and Jeff, we did a few tours of duty in this place called Larp, and it was a PvP environment all the time. So, we got used to it there. We kind of cut our teeth on PvP in those kind of ways.
Done a little bit of Larp, not a lot, but smidgen.
Yeah, and I think something was inherent to Vampire Larp that really just set it off as like, you're gonna hate everyone else you get to play with.
It's the world of darkness. That game setting is You have a very small group of friends called a coterie. Everyone else sucks.
I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and a number of other tabletop games, but Vampire is still my favorite game.
Oh, really?
Nice.
And it is absolutely my favorite. The one I will always jump at returning to anytime someone is running a game. I'm like, oh, yes, let's do that. I have generally played more tabletop version of it than LARP. I've done a very small amount of LARP.
Now, do you go back to the old school Vampire, or did you like the Requiem? Or
I did not enjoy Requiem.
You didn't enjoy Requiem?
Actually, to be fair, I have read the rules book for Requiem. I have not actually played Requiem. I did play the werewolf version, Werewolf the Forsaken.
Yep.
I did not particularly care for that over Werewolf the Apocalypse, and I've read the Vampire the Requiem stuff, and I was like, and I'm not a big fan. So I really like 20th edition. 20th edition, I thought, was a very faithful and beautiful remastering and updating of Old World of Darkness. And I'm intrigued about 5th edition. I have the books, but I haven't played it yet.
See, I need to look into that because I will say I definitely missed Masquerade's setting material, its backstory, its meta plots, like all that stuff, like the richness of the world was it was very absent from Requiem. Requiem was like, here's your toolkit, figure out what you want to tell, but we're not going to give you anything. But I do think the mechanics in Requiem were much more polished. They were much cleaner. They'd learned a lot from it compared to Masquerade. Yeah. So it was a mixed bag for me.
That's fair. I thought the Covenant was a nice layered addition to just clans, but yeah, it was.
I can say I didn't think the mechanics for the werewolf version were very good.
No,
I don't know how it worked out for vampire, but we tried werewolf, and it was just we continually coming up with stuff like, okay, how does that work? It doesn't seem to say how that works. Okay, now let me look it up. Oh wait, no, it's not in the werewolf book. We have to go to the central book to look it up.
That one.
The only thing that was kind of good about Forsaken is they went out of their way to make werewolves more playable. You were a little less deadly, you were a little easier to kill, and thus you had to maybe role play it a little more than you did with old school Apocalypse. So, I mean, short of that, like you weren't just a rage killing machine all the time. So that was maybe the only thing.
That was always a challenge with Werewolf the Apocalypse. Yeah. It's like, you're a super mighty beast, but much like Vampire, it's still World of Darkness, so it's like they still want you to be spending most of your time role-playing and doing social role-play, but you're like, but I'm a giant, powerful, feral, mighty beast. I want to slaughter things. Right. It's like another one of their games I love is Aberrant. It's a superhero setting, kind of an X-Men setting, and it's like, I have all these superpowers, but it seems a lot like you don't want me to use them. But I can literally jump over buildings. How do I not do that?
Exactly. World of Darkness always had that little strain there. Let's figure out how to make this difficult for the players so that you actually have to really think. And
that's why I like Vampire so much.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This is why I like Vampire so much within World of Darkness, because they're compared to a lot of these other settings, they're still very vulnerable in a way. And even though they're way more powerful than humans are generally, I felt like it was one of the ones where they did the best coming up with a legitimate reason why you can't just use brute force to solve every problem.
Yeah. That whole having to sleep during the day thing and bursting into the flames and sunlight, that helps.
Yeah.
Just the negatives during daytime. Like, ooh, those were brutal.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I would say for us, we've talked about this a lot, but the World of Darkness games are where we really cut our teeth on role-playing and character development, figuring out what it takes to make a flawed character that is interesting instead of just powerful. And I don't know if that was always absent in our other games, but I don't remember a focus on it until we got into those World of Darkness.
It was the
games.
First game that actually had a section called Flaws.
Sure.
And we took a look at it and we're like, wait, we get extra cool power stuff if we take these bad things too? So we would tank up on 7 points worth of flaws and we'd be like, how do we role play this? And then it was almost like training wheels for role playing then.
For sure. I could say, like, playing D&D before I played Vampire or any other tabletop game, and just D&D itself before that I was definitely less acting and role play focused. I was very much focused on how do I min-max my character, how to make a cool character that's really fun to play, and I can kill lots of stuff, and that's really great. And then started going into Vampire and a couple other games where it really encourages you to think more about the character and the plot and role play and everything, and that slowly morphed my thinking to where now when I go back to D&D, there's still a certain degree of like performance to it. Like I want an effective character because it is still a little bit of a combat focused game no matter what usually.
Sure.
And so I'm like, I don't want to make someone that's not useful, but it's more like I want to make someone who's still useful to help the party out. I don't want to be like dead weight, but how do I make them interesting and role play different aspects of the character and make an interesting background? And I think one other thing Vampire gave me was it made me want to give flaws and plot hooks to the DM or the storyteller that I brought back to D&D. And I'd be like, okay, let me make the character background, and I'm going to add this and this and this, because the DM could do all kinds of crazy stuff with that and add it into the game.
Yeah, and that's a skill that's very valuable in a player. You know, to be able to actually, we talked about it in the past, you know, like being able to write your character into the story. But that's another layer of that where it's, let me make sure that there are things for the DM or GM to utilize that are interesting. You know, because a lot of times players come to the table and they go, okay, entertain me. You know, it's like, okay, I can do that. But if you give me something, I know what you're interested in.
Yeah.
You know, this is the focus you're saying you want, so I could do something with that that's going to be really cool. And a lot of times people don't set themselves up for success like that. So I don't know if there's like a trick to it necessarily, but it is a practice I think more players need to get into.
I think it sometimes comes down to transitioning, and I don't even want to necessarily say this as in this is something that needs to happen. Because I do think that, you know, D&D and other tabletop games, perhaps some games less than others, because Vampire is kind of focused on what it likes to do sometimes. But a lot of these games, you know, are very much how people approach them and how they view them as valid. How they want to play it, with the type of experience they want to have. That's more power to. But for me, there's definitely a point where you tend to transition towards not trying to win the game.
Right.
You might be about winning a battle or winning a certain encounter, because it's always fun to mess up the DM or the storyteller, and they put something out there and you figure out some clever way around it. That's always super fun. But on the grander scale of the entire campaign, it becomes less about trying to win and just be the best and be the most amazing, and more about collaborative storytelling, more about creating an interesting experience, even if my character dies. And sometimes, especially in a game like Vampire or something, that might even be the intended result. Like, you might go into it going, yeah, my character is not going to survive this. It's more game to see how long they survive now.
You're not coming out of this in the same way you went in, that's for sure.
Yeah, that is definitely the case. Like, the number of times I went to LARP on a Friday night and was like, well, probably the last time I'm playing this character, got my backup ready in case he dies in my other pocket. And then, you know, just somehow make it out and be like, all right, I get to play again in 2 weeks. Yay.
Yeah. No, you make a good point, though. It is important that we remember when we're talking about things on here that everyone plays a game for their own entertainment, and everyone has a different take on what is entertaining. And more power to you, like you said. It's if you're having fun, you're doing it right, is what we always like to say. But, you know, if you're not sure what you are going to enjoy, there's always, you know, it's always a value to try a few things out. You know, if there's a thing you're deficient at in the table, whether that's tactical gaming, whether it's role playing, whether it's, you know, deep background writing, heavy narrative, you know, you got to be willing to kind of dabble in it a little bit just to get a sense of it. And I think a lot of players, once they give that stuff a shot, and they find some things they hate and they don't want to do it anymore, and that's fine. Now they know. But more often than not, they find that, you know, their games become richer and fuller and more dynamic. And like you were saying, it's not about winning the game. It's about enjoying the game.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, we wanted to start up Masks and Mimicry, because we wanted to do something tabletop focused. But there's a number of different shows out there that are doing things. And I was like, you know, I feel like very much most people who do tabletop, who give the actual role playing and character performance aspect of it a shot, even if they don't full blown go into it, but start to dabble with that a little bit, they come to enjoy it and find that it enriches the game, and it really gives them a much more fun experience. And so we were kind of like, you know, we want to focus on that a little bit. We want to try to create content that speaks to people who may not be experienced in that, may not be comfortable with that, because there are a lot of people, you know, I've run a lot of one-shot games for like newbie tabletop people who haven't played D&D or haven't played Vampire before, and introducing them to things and, you know, trying to get them into the game, just teaching them about it, but they're very uncomfortable about the idea of really portraying their character, and forget even doing like, you know, a character voice or anything like that.
Right.
or the people who get super enthusiastic about it because they're new and do it in a not constructive fashion.
Yeah,
Yes.
that happens sometimes too.
Facts. Yeah, I mean, there's a learning curve to it. I mean, the gaming is a skill for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, what we're finding nowadays is, with the 5th edition push and, lots of things, streaming games, like Critical Role, for instance. Most of these that we're seeing popping up are heavy role-playing, heavy acting.
Yeah,
and it's because of the platform, right? Like, you can't do a show that's just, let's do tactical fighting. And, I mean, you can, but it's a lot
I was going to
harder.
say, have you scrolled down through the D&D channels? I mean, there's a lot of that out there. But you're right, with 5th edition and with Critical Role, people are seeing it, if you want to say at the highest level being played, it's like watching professional basketball players and then you watch your kids doing those reverse layups out back, right? Like, they're going to mimic what they see at the highest level. So when you watch the most successful people doing it, and that's how they're doing it, of course, that's what they're going to reflect in their own games. Mm-hmm. So it's no surprise with that big push with 5e and this upswing in popularity that you're getting more shows that are that way and fewer just grid battle maps for 3 hours.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the entertainment component of it, right? Like, it's a different thing that we're doing online than we are at our tables, even though we're still playing tabletop games, right? Like, there is a component to streaming games that is about being an entertainer. And
People love stories.
yeah, and you need to have a good story. You need to have good characters for that to fly. So I think that it does bias people towards thinking that's what gaming is. It doesn't necessarily have to be. For me to be having my most fun, it does. But that's me personally. So what were some things you think you've really focused on that have helped your group and new people you're bringing in kind of cut their teeth on that, like get past that initial anxiety with it?
It's really tough. Like, even as someone who has done it before, has tried to bring newer people into tabletop role-playing stuff, it's still challenging because you want to walk a fine balance of, most of the time they don't come out and go like, I want to do that. So it's more like tempting them to do it, like trying to tempt them into it without pushing, because you also don't want to scare them off and try to make people do things. Because I do often find that, especially someone who hasn't played at all, playing for the first time, they usually make someone who's very quiet, who sits in the back and just does combat rolls and goes in there like, I stab them with my sword and I roll the dice. And that's fine. Like, I try to let them do that, let them ease out of their shell on their own, and try to usually just show them like by the rest of us doing. I'm really fortunate that my current group, most everybody is kind of a similar bent in that even at varying levels, we're all still pretty interested in playing our characters, creating characters with interesting backstories and personality, and doing voices and all that kind of stuff, and trying to put some personality into our characters and stuff, because that's what I really enjoy doing anyway. So I'm fortunate with that, and I think by surrounding someone who's new with that, and not trying to push them into doing it, but just demonstrating it, can help to ease them into it a little bit, can help to kind of make them interested, especially if the storyteller or the DM, for D&D's sake, is open to having that conversation with them, after they've gotten comfortable with the game and just rolling dice, then going, is there anything you want to work on? Is there anything you want to talk to me about, that we do? Have you considered building up your character backstory? Maybe there's something I can do to put that into the story, and build it into the game some. Have you, is there anything you want to add to your character to flesh out their personality? Anything I can do to help you with that? And I think just the storyteller or the DM being helpful with that, not pushy, but being available and trying to prompt them a little bit to encourage it, can help to bring people out.
Now, if you're DMing, are you usually bringing one person into your group, or are you talking like running a whole table of new people?
It varies. I have found more success with bringing people along if we're bringing like one new person into a group of people who know what they're doing. I have run like one shots for a bunch of newer people, but it tends to be, you don't really have like the role models of people who know what they're doing and stuff to follow. So everyone's kind of just doing their thing, and it has some positive and some negative. It's good in that it allows more of the new people to step up and do things because other people aren't running over them. But it also has the negative of you often end up with a bunch of new people and no one volunteers to do anything, and you have to, as the DM, come up with ways to prompt them and be like, get them to do things without just going, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing, people?
Yep. So I think it's interesting is that if you have enough people who are experienced and you have a culture at your table and you bring somebody new into it, when they're new, your culture at your table is all they will ever really know until they go to another table or until they get online and start watching, something else or get involved in some other way. So and I think that's what you were kind of hinting at, is it's easier to bring one person in because you have everyone else established. When they walk in, they'll either see everyone voice acting and role playing, and they'll say, oh crap, this ain't for me because I'm too shy and I'm too backwards, and you won't see them again. Or they'll come back the next time more prepared to do what they saw everyone else do.
Yeah, and it's almost like a work culture. You hire one new person into your organization, and they're going to see how other people interact, but also on some level, you may need to have that conversation with them and go, like, we don't necessarily expect you to do this, but it's what we do and we get along doing well. And so if you want to do this, I can help you. We can help get you there. And if they don't fit in, if they never want to do that, but that's a real big focus for your group, they may not fit long term with you.
Right. Yeah. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay to help somebody get into the hobby and then say, hey, it seems like you're interested in this sort of thing. If you know another group that is more like that, obviously you'd be like, hey, maybe you'd be more interested in this style of game that they're doing. Not everyone's going to be for every table, and that's okay too.
Yeah. That's where your friendly local game store comes in handy, where if you do know some other people, they'd be like, hey, go to the game store. You'll find a group that plays like you play because I saw them there. They'll let you in. Good luck.
Or even every game. I've had people that, again, I love Vampire, so I've tried to bring other people into Vampire before, and there's some people that enjoy it, but it's definitely never going to be their favorite game. And then there's some people that are like, play it once and go,
never again.
Yeah, probably not coming back.
We got a couple of those in our group, unfortunately.
I don't know if I've ever really, and we've done it a lot with LARP, but I've never considered Vampire to be the world's greatest entry game for tabletop role-playing games. No. There's other games, in my opinion, that are much easier softballs to pitch to people to get them in, and then you got to work your way up to Vampire.
I will say, unless they're like kind of a dark gothy kid like me who just loves pretending to be other people and acting, then it fits right in. They see it and they're like, oh, that sounds fantastic. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, let's get some of that, please.
Always did well with the goth kids and the theater kids. They always did real well. Everyone else, you had to work them into other games first, usually. But
yeah, I don't know if you have the chat up, but Malice has been asking you a few questions here in the chat. Looks like he's asking where your purple lights are.
I turn them off for this. I usually if I'm just gonna show up on someone else's show, I don't usually cast my room into purple.
Hey, if you want to be purple, you can be purple. I'm not gonna hold you back. But yeah, I think the work culture is a good example of that, because I think one of the things that happens with a gaming group too is that not only do you inspire certain positive traits, but you can also be imparting some of your own table's biases, that may not be ideal. So there's kind of a benefit sometimes to going and mixing groups up a little bit, kind of learning different things. Or as a new player, try a few different gaming groups if you can be so lucky as to find a few. See what's working. Notice that there are differences in how tables handle things, that personalities come into it a lot. And I think some of what you're saying before with, people being nervous about getting into role-playing and making that quiet character. I think a lot of times people coming into gaming communities are that shy person, that tends to be the wallflower at the party. And so that kind of happens when you're in a situation you're not comfortable with, like learning a new game system that is requiring you to be a lot of things, a gamer, an actor, a writer, all in one time. And, people don't want to make mistakes in front of new friends. So, it happens. You just got to give people that chance to kind of settle in and, find what's working for them. And I love the approach you were describing before. It's really good.
Yeah, one of the things I've actually found that I think does help, especially with the more shy players, is actually playing online without video. It's more difficult in like every other way. Mm-hmm. But especially for seasoned, experienced role players, like I miss playing at a tabletop so much because all of our games are no video. We're just sitting there, and it presents a lot of different challenges that we have to work through of how to convey things with our characters and things. But for someone who's inexperienced and even shy, not having to be in front of someone can certainly help them start to role play, because then they go, oh, no one can see me. I'm kind of, it's kind of like being anonymous and being on the internet. You can say whatever you want because no one can do anything to you. And you're not quite anonymous, but people aren't seeing you actively. You're not going to like see them laugh if you say something silly or whatever. And so I think that can really help with coming out of that shell a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
I had that in my previous Zweihander game. I had a player who had never played any tabletop role-playing game before. And one of the things he said was that, not having cameras was probably a benefit for him, just because it let him learn the system and dabble with a little role-playing without realizing and being self-conscious about his face literally being out there. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a big jump to go on to the online format, too, knowing that you're going in front of an audience, plus it's going online forever and a video on demand.
He did a great job.
He did.
So
he
did well. So
yeah, it's a different thing. Like, these are different experiences that obviously we didn't have coming into it. But I think it's kind of interesting, though. You were describing early on you were doing online games in a written format. And I did some of that, too, back in the day, like the MUDs. But I think it creates a different style of gamer, necessarily, because you have to be very descriptive. You have to be collaborative in the process, because, there were technically rules to like what you could or couldn't do, but largely those seem to be really free form. Like, what's happening here? Well, just whatever people are saying is happening. Yeah. Like, what were those experiences like for you? Like, and how do you think those impacted your subsequent play styles?
That is a really good question. That has been a very long time, but I kind of cut my teeth with character role playing on AOL chat room in a universe called Raiden, which basically existed only on AOL chat rooms, and it had certain rules of sorts, but they were very few and far between and very loose in general. It was like more like basic RP guidelines of respect and yada yada yada, and not god modding and things like that. No power playing and those sort of things. And then people, not everyone, but some people would belong to roleplay guilds, which would usually have like a theme in their own chat room, and you would do stuff like. And some of those, including mine that I was in, would have systems for like leveling up, basically, where you would do duels and fights and stuff and get XP and level up your characters. But then if you left your guild and went and did stuff with other people, that didn't really apply at all, because there was no universal central system.
Yeah.
So then you would have different systems and different for interacting with other people, or you would more often you would just do something completely freeform and collaborative, where you're writing attacks at each other and stuff, but there's really no system for it. You're just making it up and deciding what happens to your character and what doesn't. And I think that very much instilled upon me, one, an ability to role play in MMOs, which I've done a lot of. Because it very much translated into that, where in MMOs, again, you don't have any rules or systems unless your guild comes up with them.
Right.
Very much so.
But also an appreciation of consent in roleplay.
Big one.
And I don't just mean that in like the when facing certain, very problematic social issues. But just the idea of like with player PvP and stuff, not doing things to other people's characters that they would not want to have happen to them. Now, if you're the DM or the storyteller, you do whatever you do for the most part in that regard. If you're gonna kill their character, you're gonna kill their character.
Right.
But as like a player, there's a certain collaborative aspect to it, and so I wouldn't. It's just given me a strong appreciation for the consensual aspect of role play and how, I don't necessarily just do things to other people's characters. I won't say I never do. I won't say I've never pickpocketed another player's character or something. But it's definitely something that kind of weighs on me of like, where's that line that, like this is okay, but then, I'm not going to go kill them in their sleep.
Right.
But then that varies by game too, because as you mentioned, like Vampire is a very cutthroat sort of game.
Yeah.
You get that opportunity to go for it.
It's not the one I bring new players into very often.
Well, I think it's an interesting concept that, in total here, is that I think that format you're describing and the lessons you pulled it from it, it also kind of goes into making sure that the other players are enjoying themselves, right? That your enjoyment isn't the only one that matters. And I think that's something it takes players a while to figure out. How much time should I be taking from the group? I'm doing a little side scene. How much should my character be talking as opposed to theirs? Or should I be doing this thing like you're describing, pickpocketing somebody? Well, if it's just to do it because it's loot sore for me, maybe no. But if it's something that creates a dynamic situation that they are going to be able to interact with, and you're okay with losing, like that the outcome may not be positive for me, but it'll be fun for everyone else. I think that's like a huge level up in your player skill, and I think that is something I also kind of got from that same sort of stuff. Like those onlines do require players to sit around and give and take like that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like it kind of, it might have been a starting point for where I really started thinking about other people's fun, and how I do things to make other people, to help other people have a good time. That translates into things, in D&D and other games now, where there's a term that's used in like acting and improv specifically. I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like giving the spotlight or sharing the spotlight or something, where that I find myself doing sometimes when I feel like someone else may not be getting to do enough, or they may not be getting to say enough, or I feel like I'm doing too many things, and instead I would do something to prompt or to redirect things to someone else to try and give them an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's always an important thing to kind of get a feel for, and that's something that definitely comes with experience. When you're dealing with new players, obviously it's usually kind of like the elephant in the room, because they're usually sitting there and everyone's very cognitively aware that there's somebody here who's not normally here. So sometimes people get a little hyper focused on, hey, new buddy, let's go do new buddy things, So, they can overdo it a little bit, but yeah, I think there's definitely a spot for, once you have more experience like players together, you start to get a feel for that, like who's not being actively involved, and how can I kind of pitch them a ball to hit or something so they get a little more into it.
Yeah, well, it's like my current D&D character is a wizard with a very high investigation check. And so, by default, anytime we need to make investigation, he's pretty much teed up. He has the highest investigation. Like, would you like to check for traps? But, I sometimes try to, especially if it's not like high stakes or something, I try to sometimes push that open for other people to do it, because he's not the only one that can do a halfway decent job at it. And I'm like, he shouldn't be the one that's constantly doing it just because he's the best at it. I want to give other people a chance to flex their skills, even if that particular one may not be as good as mine. And we might fail, but oh well. That can be fun sometimes.
Yeah, we've talked about that in past episodes. I think when you learn that failure is oftentimes more enjoyable than winning in a role-playing game, that's another one of those milestones, I think. It's failing spectacularly is great.
Yeah. And in that case, you're not even failing. What you're doing is you're just relenting. You're not failing it. You're just letting somebody else do it instead. Yeah. And then seeing whether they make it or not. That's another aspect of it. You never know what's going to happen when they do it. And that kind of falls back then on the GM or DM again to kind of know how to let things fail and progress at the same time.
Which is a difficult skill.
Yeah.
And I will say that's something I still work on, is when coming up with alternatives. Like, okay, if someone fails, that does not have to mean they die.
Right. Yeah.
What are the alternative options here? How do I avoid having a TPK because I don't really want one right here. I want to continue this on, but it has to be punishing. What do we do here? How do we spin it so that it's still fun? It still sucks for them because they failed, so it should. But what do you do with it? And sometimes that just means killing them.
Well, and I think it
doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Because you have to have death as a consequence, and I do think that pain and anguish to a reasonable extent is it builds story. It builds long-term enjoyment of the game. If everything's always success, happiness, and rainbows, you can have fun, but it's not as impactful or as memorable as.
Campaign length has a lot to do with that. Because, if you're telling a very short story, it can be real happy-go-lucky for a short story, and it's fine. Yeah. But if you're in campaigns like our Everstorm game, we're literally on month 18 or so of playing the same campaign, you gotta have ups and downs. You gotta have a bit of both. So.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think consequences are necessary, and because you need that counterbalance to make those scenes really stand out. When you succeed, it has to feel really good, and that oftentimes comes because it's hard. It's not expected. It's not the same if you have God mode on and you win the level as it is when you struggle through it, and it's. I think that's something as DMs, a lot of DMs are afraid to do that. I think. I think there's two sides of it. I think there's the DMs that want to murder their party from get-go and they have no qualms with it, and then I think there's the flip side where it's just I want to make sure that they have a great time and that nothing bad happens and they get through the whole adventure and they see everything. And you're like, well, there's somewhere in the middle.
I just want to make sure when they have their death that it was a good life.
Yeah.
I want them to think back about how great their character's life was when I killed them. I don't want to do it off the bat.
Yeah, and that's why I know that this can be a point of contention on the internet. But why I am a proponent of using storyteller screens, and I will blatantly tell people I have fudged rolls, but it's generally because I messed something up. If I did something that for instance, if I failed to balance a fight properly and I know it, I'm going into it and I'm like, oh, I should not have thrown this much stuff at them. This is my fault. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm going to fudge a bunch of rolls to make sure they win. But, if you come down and there's a crit or something that I can go, you know what? That's a 9. It's not a 20.
Right.
Because, again, I should not have thrown this much stuff at them. I messed it up. I will do that. I will roll it back mentally and go, that's not a 20. That's a 19. I didn't one-shot you. It's okay. It hurt. But I don't necessarily. But again, that's something when I feel like it's my fault. Right. I don't necessarily do that if the dice just say bam. We had a session a couple weeks back. One of our players plays his character very bold, and he's a tank. He's super tanky, but he gets right out in the front and just starts taking all the hits. And there have to be consequences for that. And he was blocking a lot. He was getting missed a lot because he has real high AC. But then he got a couple good hits in. Got a crit on him. He got knocked down by something that had 2 attacks. Second attack comes around. I'm like, there's another person there, but I was like, no, he takes it on you. Hits you again. You're down to your last death save. And I just sit back and I'm like, what are y'all going to do? Because I'm like, no, I didn't do this. This is not my fault.
Exactly.
No, that is exactly right. I mean, I know for me, I don't use DM screens. My players learn to run.
And again, I'm not saying that I will fudge rolls a lot. But it is those moments where it's like, oh, I think this is my bad.
Yeah.
And those don't happen a lot, but I've had them occasionally where I'm like, I think this one's on.
Yeah, I agree with that kind of mentality. I know Dustin and I we've had our argument officially online about this a few weeks back, but
we did a couple weeks back.
Dustin was so excited to have that argument. I was like, okay, we're sure, whatever. But I agree though. Like if there are going to be times where as a DM you're going to overtool something, or in our case, like the module I got is clearly overtuned. Like that thing is ridiculous, and so I've made some adjustments. Or if you're in a scene and it goes away that there wasn't ever an opportunity for the players to make a meaningful choice because of the way the dice are flowing, that's an area where I would think about fudging a die roll. Because nobody wants to have in a situation where, like, okay, so I didn't get any decisions here at all. Like, nothing I did mattered. Great, So I think there are times to do it. I don't think it should be done very often. I don't think it should be...
For sure.
I don't think it should deny interesting elements of gameplay, like character death, for instance.
My golden rule for it, and I don't, man, the number of times I've ever fudged a die is I could count on one hand, and that's in 30 years of role playing. But I think the golden rule is that in no way, shape, or form can the players ever get a whiff that that's what's going on, because you want that victory to be meaningful. You don't want it to be seems like it's foretold, or that the DM is in no way, shape, or form going to outright kill you. Because then if you do outright kill them, then it seems personal. And for me, I don't want it to be personal if I kill you. I'll show you the dice rolls. It just happened. Sorry, friend. Make a new character. We'll talk about how cool your new one's going to be. Or if I'm going to fudge anything, where I will fudge rules is on the back end. After I've killed you, we will talk about new ways you can come back to life after I've done killed you and the negative consequences thereof. But I am not pulling my punches at the time, probably.
And that's the thing. Again, I don't do it that often. And we actually normally play on Monday, so we're not having a session tonight because I'm here.
Thanks for taking the time away. Appreciate that.
But last week we play over Roll20. And I do roll with like the GM filter on, so they don't see my rolls. And I took a screenshot and sent it to them in the middle of a battle, showing them my rolls, because I rolled what had to have been my fourth critical in as many turns. And I was like, I just stopped, and I was like, hold on a second, I need a minute. Screenshot, paste, put it into Discord. I was like, I just want y'all to see that because I just critted on you again. I don't want you to think I'm making this up, so here you go. There's my fourth critical right there in your face. I'm sorry. This is going to hurt.
we have a guy in our group, and anyone who watches T2KB is probably by this point well aware of how often Clint will crit with a D20 roll.
It's ridiculous.
And we aren't going to say what he may run, but you'll notice that thus far Clint hasn't run any games here, and there's a reason for that, because we are terrified of the idea that Clint might actually DM something. But there is something maybe coming out soon that he is very interested in maybe doing, and I'm already telling myself I'm playing the most social character I can in that game, because I don't want any reason for him to have to swing any kind of weapon at me, because it'll be all over.
Run for the hills, just retire
for the hills. We're going to talk our way out of all of it.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about Wednesday night. We run a Pathfinder 2 game. I'm running it as a DM, and we're running a module. And I was talking about earlier. It's very overtuned. It apparently was developed before the game was finalized, and so things didn't get tuned back down. And I've already dropped stats down by like 4 or 5 to hit bonus, and like dropped damage down by like 4 or 5 off the number, and it's still kicking their teeth in. And there's a fight we're about to do on Wednesday. I'm pretty positive it's a TPK. Like, even nerfed, I think it's going to be one. Hey, Sailor, welcome to the chat.
Hey. Now, because I'm not there Wednesday, if it happens, it's because I wasn't there.
Yeah. Well, that's another awkward situation. So Dustin's not going to be there. We left on a cliffhanger of the boss appearing in front of them and initiatives being rolled. There's a possibility Dustin's character may be killed while he's not there. Have you run into that situation in the past?
Yeah. Well, I've never run into it where someone did die while they weren't there, but certainly getting close. And it's always, wherever possible, I do ask, like, okay, can someone else play your character for you? Or at least do your dice rolls. If they're not comfortable with that, I'll usually run them, and I just kind of keep them on the back burner, and I do have them do actions and stuff. And I try to make it as honest to their character as I can. Like, our last session, I had to play one of my players' characters, and there was no way around it. I couldn't make them go off anywhere or anything. They were in the middle of a thing. Like, they left off having walked into this cave, and they walked into this cave, and there's odd stuff dripping from the ceiling, and they see some glittering stuff in the back of the cave. They're like, oh, that's interesting. And they walk in there, and I'm like, and then you go to step, and your feet do not lift from the ground. You're stuck to it. And the opening closes down, and the walls oddly begin looking like flesh. And then they were going to start the next session inside of a giant mimic. And
oh man.
This is one reason I do on rare occasions I like to have the option of fudge rolls, because I like to make up monsters and or alter existing ones, and I'm not always super good at balancing combat encounters. And so, kind of like Malice had said earlier in chat, there are certain fights I want to be the really dangerous ones, and other ones I want to be fun and interesting. But I'm like, I didn't intend anybody to die here, you know. So, and I like to make up stuff. So I like kind of homebrewed this whole encounter. But one of my players, gone. And so I was like, okay. And so, whenever I play him, I do very much try to honestly look at what he's done in past battles. And so leading up to a fight, I sit there, I'm like, he stays in the back, he shoots with his little bow, he might use a bard spell to cast fear and send them running off, but he stays very much extricated. So that's what I did. He's in the back, he's staying out. And I'm like, look, I tried to keep him away from the fight as much as possible because I felt like that's what he would do. And in fact, I even tried to convince everyone else not to have this fight and to try to just escape, because again, that he said that like numerous times. So I try to play him honestly, and if he dies, he dies.
I know we've covered it a little bit. I did the same thing at the end of my last Whitehander game. I had two players who couldn't make the last session. One of them was hospitalized. And so I asked him, I was like, so what would your character do in this final battle? The final battle had been kind of set. They knew there was no tomorrow. And he was just like, if they need to sacrifice me, do it. I was like, okay. So then he died off screen while he was in a hospital room somewhere. He died, and it went down gloriously. He watched it later. He was like, oh, that was the best. Like, he was totally cool with it. The other player just missed it. I didn't know she was going to miss. And so her character did just fight in the corner. And then when things got bad, she ran. Like, when everyone else started running, she ran too. So it was like on cue, go. So
it's tricky. It's real tricky when you don't have a game plan ahead of time. But like in my case, sorry to cut you off there, but in my situation, like I tried to sit down with Dustin the other day and say, hey, you're going to be absent. This is the situation. Like, how do you want us to handle this? Is there something that you're okay with? What if these sorts of things happen? Would this be a problem? Like where are the boundaries? For us. And now Dustin and I played together for decades at this time, so we have an understanding of how we each go about it. So our conversation is a little light, but I think that's an important aspect of it. Not only knowing what the character would do and playing along with that, but also having that discussion with the player to say, look, here's the circumstance. Where are your comfort levels at?
Yeah, I mean, and our answer is easy. Clint rolls all my attack rolls. No problem.
I'm kind of fortunate with my current group. Like, most of us have been playing together for a while now, and so we are pretty comfortable with that. They are, I think, comfortable with me as a DM. Like, they don't they don't think I just make stuff up and all that stuff. But that's something like I do set parameters for the game before we start, and like based on how many people we have. So like our current group is 5 players and myself, not playing a character. And so my general guideline going into it is if we have more than one person missing a session, we're not meeting. Because we're down to 3 people. Most likely, if we're missing 2 people, we're not going to meet. And for the most part, that hasn't been a problem. We meet once a week. We've been pretty consistent about it. And I don't necessarily say it's guaranteed, but it would kind of depend on what we were doing. Like if we were doing something where I felt like I could pull 3 of them aside and do something, I might still do something with them. But for the most part, I'm like general guidelines, especially if there's going to be like a battle or something like that we're going into. If we're missing too many people, we're just not going to do it. We'll just skip, meet up the next week. And then outside of that, we do have that kind of expectation of that's how we do things. Usually if somebody's missing, somebody's going to play them or the DM's going to play them and just... we don't really have an existing expectation on whether or not we're going to let them die as much as I think we just all kind of know, like, if they die, then they die. Yeah. We're certainly going to try to keep them out of it, like, as the DM or something. I think there's a kind of an expectation to try to protect them a little bit. Try not to at least throw them into it blatantly. Yeah. But ultimately, I 90% try to act like they're still there. Yeah, me per normal. And maybe where I can ease it off a little bit, if everyone runs, I just declare they ran and they're running with you, and they're.
Yeah, I mean you can't have a major battle going on and like person's over there at the water cooler hanging out watching it go down. Like you can't have that going on. They got to be there participating in some meaningful fashion.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because we covered the topic of PC death in one of our earliest episodes. I think like 4 or something like that. It was
the earliest episode, Jeff.
Was
one.
It was not 1. 1 was it was about alignment.
2. Sorry, episode 2.
Okay, so it may have been 2. Yeah, we talked about character death and retirement. And it's been so long since we officially had that conversation. It's probably good that we kind of come back to it because there are circumstances. It's a very touchy topic. It's very important to people, and I think. For me, the thing that I said earlier about players feeling like they had a meaningful chance or a meaningful choice in things is very important to a death. And for the death to feel, again, meaningful, like that word keeps popping in my head. Like, there has to be a story there. There has to be something good. You don't want it to be that, like, oh, there was one dog in an alley that popped out, and you got lucky, crit you to death. Yeah. Wow, that was weird. What was that dog's name? I don't even know if it had a name,
Yeah, I think it's very much like what Dustin said earlier, with having a player that wasn't there, but then the death was so cool and heroic that they were like, no, I'm totally down with that. And I think, at least for my group, that's what most people want, is that if they're going to die, I don't think any of them necessarily want their character to die, for sure, but if it is going to happen, for it to be meaningful and for it to have purpose and be cool, and not for them to just feel powerless, for them to feel like it was preordained. They didn't have a choice in what was going to happen. They were completely overpowered. And that's where I think you get into some difficulty with putting in encounters the players are not meant to win, which I would definitely do.
Yeah.
But
I think it's tricky.
It's very tricky in making it very clear to them that they are not supposed to be winning this fight, or... making it very, very clear that if they choose to stay and fight something, like it may not go in their way.
Yeah. Now, I think a good addendum to that is if you're going to put in something that they can't win through combat, the route to victory probably is something that's not combat related. Like, I did that a little bit at the end of Treefell. There was a pretty serious thing they had to confront. And they had serious choices to make that led up to that thing even being there. And they made those choices because the other choices to them were too heinous. They couldn't do it as a group. They couldn't pull themselves to make the hard choice, so they took the hard battle instead. Mm-hmm. And when they got to the hard battle, and then they tried to put the genie back in the bottle, if you will, it went horribly wrong. And so, and they were asking me after the fact, my players were like, well, can we beat that thing? Well, you can. You just critically failed all your rolls, and I can't help you with that. But, if they would have tried to combat that thing with actual weapons and an actual brawl, it would have murdered them easily. And they knew that. So they tried the other route, and they just rolled bad, and it just didn't happen for them. So then they didn't mind that they died the way they died. They were cool with it. They had a good long campaign. It was the end of the campaign. They knew there was no tomorrow, and they felt like they had good deaths, even the people who couldn't be there. So,
well, I think you've nailed it on the head. There is that the players need to understand what they're getting into, or have the opportunity to understand what they got themselves into, and an opportunity to potentially fix that issue. You don't want the thing that just jumps out and just gacks a person in one round before they even get their initiative, and if you're trying to introduce a big bad evil guy early in the campaign, they're like, oh, this guy's level 12, you guys are level 1. Yeah, if you pick a fight with him, it's not going to go well. But maybe you should let your players have a chance to escape,
Oh, yeah, for sure. It needs to be abundantly clear. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to be fighting this person, and there are opportunities to escape. If you would just take them. Like in a recent game session, this actually wasn't quite that, because they potentially could have defeated this monster. It wasn't something that was like, there's no way they're going to defeat this, but it was like, I was very much trying to make it clear, like, something is coming. They had a couple rounds before this thing appeared. And they just gotten through a long, hard fight. And it was like, there's something else coming, and it's big. And I gave them a couple rounds to basically decide what you're going to do. And so it was very much if you stay and fight this, it's going to be pretty tough. You might die. It's not guaranteed. Like they could have won, but it was like something that was nesting there and didn't have a inclination to chase them. So when they finally did decide, okay, this is not going our way, and they tried to flee, it chased them for like a round or two, and then backed off and was like, yeah, get out of my stuff. And they're like, and they're gone. And I'm like, it stops chasing you. And they're like, oh, okay. Well, good. I'm like, yeah, it's going back to its den now.
I have found my best, and you can tell me if you do this or if you agree with this, the number one way I keep accidental character deaths from happening is I don't do random encounters, and I don't do random traps.
I do not do random encounters. I do not do random traps. I do random encounters, and like travel encounters and stuff. There may be a random happenstance or something that you encounter, but I have pre-canned them. I have developed them already and put them in a list by level and went, what thing do I want to do now? Mm-hmm. And then if it's like a dungeon or something, I have pre-built traps, puzzles, everything ahead of time. I am not the most meticulous planner ever, but I plan things in detail, and I do not just roll on random tables and throw stuff out.
Call me crazy, and I'm sure Jeff will, because he likes to do this a lot. Whenever I have a quote-unquote random encounter, I build a roleplay encounter instead. I build a situational encounter instead. Yeah. If you're traveling and something's going to go wrong, your axle breaks. I Oregon Trail your ass is what I do. The axle breaks, food got ready for no there. Like, I hate like random encounters. Like, okay, here's another hour and a half of combat. Everybody have a good time. Like, I want the role play to happen instead. So, like, if I get a random encounter in my last Whitehunter game, they came across the traveling merchant who talked to them for a while his friends were stealing shit out of the back of their cart. And just see how long it took them to make an awareness check to see how much got taken. Like, it was not a combat, and they all just ran. Like, so I like to do other things like that. I don't like the random encounters or it's combat. Like, those drive me nuts.
Well, you're not crazy. I do mine about 50-50. Maybe a little bit more than 50% is not combat. I will introduce other things that happen. Like my party was camping out one night, and they just set up their camp, and they could see a smoke trail kind of lifting up from perhaps another camp about an hour or so away. And they decided, all right, two of us are going to sneak over there to see what it is. And so they started making all these stealth checks and creeping over there, creeping up to it. And what they found were some traveling merchants had a camp. It just happened, and they're like, I I'm gonna go closer to see if that's what it really is, and like sneak up to it to see what it is. And then the merchants are all like, "Oh, who's out there?" And then they come in and they're like, "Oh, well, hi, I'm Dax. Would you like to buy some meat?"
Exactly.
It's like,
Because players will not trust those NPCs. They will not trust those NPCs no matter what until a 12-hour interrogation and 15 spells have been used. Then only then will they trust those NPCs.
It's almost as if every merchant we come across on the road is robbing us.
Yeah, sometimes it happens. Other times it doesn't.
Yeah,
I do like to. I will say I do like to determine random encounters and the type by the area as well.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the game I'm running right now is set in Eberron, specifically in Breland. So a lot of the areas they may be traveling in are kind of civilized and are much more likely to have role-play encounters than combat encounters. But combat encounters still might happen. There might be brigands, there might be other things, but it's definitely going to be reduced. Whereas if they go off into like Sea Largo or something, combat encounters probably going to crop up in percentage more. But I've actually been using this game to experiment with a lot of different things I wouldn't normally do, like different types of music I wouldn't normally add for adding mood, different types of mechanics for certain things I've just been playing with and seeing how they take. And one thing I've been doing is I changed travel into a party skill challenge because I get really tired of just like doing every day of travel and be like, okay, you're traveling and now you're making camp. Who's keeping watch? All right, roll perception, roll perception, roll perception. And instead I was like, all right, you know what? How far are you traveling? All right, I'm doing that. I'm setting up this. Okay, now one of you make me a perception check. One of you make me a survival check. And I created kind of a system of adding those together. And based on the risks in the area, the type of area, and how long they're traveling, I just determine, all right, this is how many things are going to happen in there. And so then we can kind of go, this thing happens. And I try to build in opportunities for them to engage each other along the way. They do a little bit of travel and discourse and stuff. And maybe at night when they're camping, they might talk a little bit. But there's so much more of that I can kind of skip through. Because I'm not constantly having to be like, are you wanting to do anything?
right.
Are you wanting to do anything now? I'll be like, okay, is there anything you want to do on this trip? If not, I can kind of breeze us through a couple of days. Because some of that just gets so mundane and so much dice rolling that I feel sometimes compelled to do. Like, okay, roll the perception checks. Because if I don't do it, then when I do it, they're like, oh, yeah, there's something here because I had to roll a perception check. So I'm like,
right.
Try to work
call
out
for a
some of that.
non-roll. You're calling for a non-roll is what you're doing.
Really. And
it goes well till they roll a 20 on that non-roll, and you're like, okay, so what did you see?
You're very confident now that there's nothing out here. Then they're like, okay, great.
Yep. Nice.
And then they get real suspicious of you. They're like, no, I rolled a 20, so I saw it. I mean, I had to see it. It's there.
Surely there's something out here.
Yeah, no, it's interesting with that because it kind of goes back to there was a video game version of Pathfinder called Kingmaker, and they had a pretty interesting system in there where each party member had like a roll that they needed to make to kind of dictate what was going on in the night. You know, like how many hit points people got back over the night, or if you got a special buff from prepping a good meal, or you had your guards that needed to see if they spotted whatever badness was there. You had like a stealth roll to see how well you hid your camp. And it was just like every time you went to bed, you just rolled those dice, and it was like, this is what happens. And then you got to, like you said, fast forward through this stuff. Now, like in Dustin and I, our table really doesn't do travel encounters.
We hand wave a lot of travel.
Yeah. So like we've gotten away from, like, we don't really do random stuff just because of the nature of our table's time. Like we get to play once a month or once every 2 weeks.
Oh yeah,
at best, you know. So like if you had a session where it's like, so you run into 3 goblins. Is this part of the story? No, just 3 goblins are just out there. Great. Okay. Well, that's 1 hour of the 4 we have. Let's do this.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. I don't like random encounters. Like,
I can for sure understand that. Like we meet weekly, and we meet pretty consistently weekly. So if we waste a little bit of time on something like that, I'm pretty okay with it. But even then, like I said, I kind of came up with this system because I was like, I want to have a system where they can still fail And if they roll really poorly, like they might blunder into an ogre who wants to kill them. But if they're rolling high on if they roll high on this, that some of these encounters can be optional. Like they might see something that's threatening, but see it at such a distance that they could completely go around it if they want to. Because they rolled high. I mean, like, no, you see it, but it's like way over there, and you can totally just whoosh around it.
As a side question for you, because this is something that comes up, do you use experience points?
I was going to go there too.
And if so, when they see ogre and avoid it, do they get the experience?
In my current game, it flip-flops what I do. In my current game, I do not use experience points. I have started using a loose system of milestones. I try not to build it into like a hard, like you must get to this point to level. I kind of mitigate it a little bit by number of sessions as well. I kind of toe the line in between. I don't go like, okay, every 10 sessions you level, or you have to get to this exact point in the story. I have a general point where I'm like, okay, they're going to level here, but then if they take extra sessions to do something they're into, but they're not quite there, I may still give them a level eventually. It might have taken a little longer than if they had just gone to the thing I wanted them to, but I won't just keep dragging it out because I'm like, no, I said it there. I said it was going to be there. That's going to do the thing. I'm like, no, I'll rebalance the fights.
Yeah.
Now, that Angel Shadows talk about his players would revolt, they didn't get XP. But what's interesting in your scenario is that that's a big walking chunk of XP that ogre is. So the moment you put one out there and you let them see it because they rolled so well, then you got to either honor the fight that they want because they want the XP, or you got to pay them for not fighting.
Yeah.
So
and I would say
conundrum if you go that route.
I for very much that reason, I've kind of moved away from using XP. Besides, honestly, tabulating XP for everybody, and especially like if someone misses a session and then do you give them XP and everything, it's a huge pain in the ass, honestly. Yeah. Whereas the milestone method is so much easier, and I have not had a single player complain about it yet.
Hey, thanks for the subscription there, VTech. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
But also, even when I used XP, what I would do is, if they avoided a fight like that, I might not give them all the XP for it, but I would still give them some XP because they resolved the encounter. They figured out another way around it. They resolved it. I might lower the XP a little bit, but I'd still give them XP. And so then I'm like looking at it, I'm like, so why am I even bothering with XP? Like, they're going to get to the level. They still got to earn the level. They still got to get to the point. They just aren't getting points to track it.
You know what kills XP for me? Real easy. Mid-session, hit the number. We all have to stop and upgrade our characters now. No, that's crap you do between games. You are not leveling till the end of the session, one way or the other. Like, I don't need you counting your XP and being like, I just popped a level. Hold on, everyone. Like, that ain't happening. No.
Yeah.
My last game where I gave XP, I required you to take a long rest before you would get before you would level.
Yeah. XP happens at sunrise and sunrise only.
You have to have your bacon and eggs. I think it's interesting because, like, you get what you incentivize, right? So, like, in the old school games where it was XP, one after the other, you obviously got situations like people boiling anthills, because that's what the game was telling you to do. Yeah. Or going into deadly encounters that you have no reason to go into. Like, when was the last time you just randomly decided, I'm going to go pick a fight in a bar that doesn't need to happen? It should be rare, hopefully. But, like, I don't know. I feel like you get a much more realistic game when you start to get into more milestone styles, or maybe not just like literal milestones, but like when you feel like a party did something of significance, some interesting development. Maybe you got into a character's backstory enough to start to learn who they are. That may be a leveling, point or something. Like, I really like those, a lot more than I like the XP tracking.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, kind of my main thing that I love about tabletop role playing is the character engagement, the voice, the acting, and everything. For me, D&D and other tabletop role-playing games are really more about acting and collaborative storytelling. And XP systems give you nothing for that unless you build it in yourself and then go, okay, well, I'll give them this much, but then it's really hard. Like, how do you quantify social role-play and XP rewards? and put that into a system. And so that's what really killed it for me. Like, ultimately, I was just sitting there like, I'm going through all this hassle, calculating XP and everything, and I still want people to level, even if they decide that they're going to spend the entire session in camp talking about things. And in one of our recent sessions, they spent a good hour in camp at night talking to each other about what they were going to do in the next upcoming part of it. And you know, on the one hand, it was a little bit frustrating because I was just like, okay, really? Like, you're gonna have a separate conversation with every member of the party? All right. But then on the other hand, I just get to sit back and watch them play out their characters, and I'm like, I don't want to not reward them for this. They've been playing for an hour, and they've been doing what they want to do, and it's the part of the game I really enjoy anyway. So, to hell with XP.
Yeah, no, I am right there with you. And to me, XP was always almost a feedback system for the players to know that the DM was, I guess, rewarding them at proper intervals. It was like training wheels for DMing. It was like, hey, every so much amount of monsters that die, they should gain a level. Well, DMs don't understand that or what the pace of a game should feel like until they've gone through XP a time or two. And then they realize they can drop it. So I could see at the beginning why you might use it, but I think after a while you get a feel for the pace of your story and your game. You can eventually just throw XP out the window.
And I can say, as a player, it does feel good when you see yourself getting close to that next XP bracket, and you see it, you're like, the level's there, it's coming. Oh yeah, and you don't really get that with milestone progression much.
That's true.
I mean, the DM can tell you like you're gonna gain a level in 2 sessions, so be thinking about what you want, but it's not quite the same. So I could definitely see how some people could miss that, where they're like, oh, I'm almost there. It's there. It's coming. I want it. But I do think it also really heralds back to some of that more competitive aspect of the game that isn't the big focus.
It was the currency you earned if you didn't get gold and items. You got XP. Yeah. It was your reward.
Well, and I think it does something strange too, because it tells you right away that the only way that your character is going to grow and succeed is by being good at fighting. The more you focus on fighting, the better your character is going to be. And
for D&D, I mean, 75% of the book's a combat simulator, so it's not wrong either.
I suppose that's true, but it definitely reinforces things like, oh, the intelligence and charisma and wisdom are dump stats unless you're a caster. Like, why do I even have these on my sheet? Oh, okay.
Nah. Until 5th ed, now strength's a dump stat for everything.
A lot of them.
And I mean everything, pretty much. Like
half the classes use charisma. I mean,
look how far we've come in 5 editions.
We have that problem with my current group a little bit because they are like all of them except one is pretty much charisma primary stat. And I'm just like, I'm waiting for me to rue this. There is not a social skill they do not have between them.
When you're the one strength guy and then the strength item rolls on the chart, you're like, well, that's clearly mine. You guys can use it.
Pretty much.
So I mean, the milestones I think do drop you into character a little bit more and get you focusing in the right areas. But I mean, there's a lot of things that we've been talking about, that kind of get you there to help you create that backstory. We talked a little bit about voicing is an important aspect of it, or setting the mood at your table. You're saying you're using music, and that was a topic we had a few weeks ago, or actually last week with.
That was actually the topic last week, even.
Time doesn't exist anymore. I don't know if you guys have experienced this in the last couple months, but it's
remember days.
I don't even know where I'm at half the time.
Hashtag essential worker. I don't know what you're talking about. Days and nights are still there. I've been working all of them this week, but
it's with you, man. But so we talked a little bit about setting moods with music and things, but I think it's important to bring in different aspects to your game. Like finding ways, like Resident Hana is the person I was talking to the last time. If you have good mood music going, you create an environment instantly for somebody. You create a tension, or you create a whimsical format for your role play. and like you said before, developing those good voices or having that interesting backstory that's ready to like kind of go into it. It gives you a lot to play with, and it gives other people stuff to play with. Now, do you find that there's any particular aspect that helps you get into a character just like immediately?
Get into a character? Like to get into my own character, for me, it comes down to I don't usually have trouble getting into a character for a session because for me, it's more of a process of building the character and immersing them. Spending so much time creating their backstory and creating the different aspects, traits, and quirks sometimes of that character. And I tend to spend a lot of time before I play the character thinking about them, thinking about their responses and how they react to different things, their mannerisms. I will say, however, that I don't always use a particular voice for a character, but more often than not, I do. And I do find that tends to tie things together for me. Giving a character a certain voice, whether it is a manner of speaking or a certain tone that they use, or even sometimes like a certain type of accent or something, helps me to start to embody them. Like I can feel much more like that character once I start to speak it. And so sometimes I will do that right before it starts. I will start slipping into the character and using their voice, and that helps get in the right mindset.
I think a good voice helps. I've gone about it a few different ways with different characters over time. My Larp character, I had a playlist, and I would put it on half hour before Larp when I was driving to Larp and listen to it on the way there. And by the time I got there, I was ready to go. Whereas, for some of our online games, like when I play Clashius, I use my Mike Tyson voice. And so, I can slip into that real easy, and it doesn't take much to play Clashius because I can do that, on the drop of a hat. Whereas when I play like my Druid Bowrin, like it takes a little longer to get into Bowrin mode.
It takes about as long as it takes to finish a bottle of rum. Yeah,
it takes some rum, and it takes a certain amount of like. I think with Bowrin, I don't so much do like an accent voice, but more just a vocabulary shift from my regular vocabulary to things Bowrin says. So it's a little. Sometimes I listen to the sea shanties during the day while I'm doing like chores and shit while I'm getting ready to go. So.
I have had characters where there were certain songs that made me think of that character, and usually discovered after making the character, and then even to this day, listening to that song will make me think of that character and start dwelling on them. So,
yeah, it's really interesting how that works. You can, because like a lot of times, like a character will have its own likes and dislikes that are unique from your own, and that can also go back to music. Like we've had. You were talking about playlist for your vampire character. Like, I remember there were certain songs for my characters that got me in a mood that I would never listen to, on my own time. Like, it's just not in my wheelhouse at all, but it was perfect for the character.
Right.
And it's really interesting because you develop like an appreciation for it while you're in character.
I did it for my whole Zweihander campaign. In fact, I'm doing it for this one too. I put a hype song out before every session. That is a piece of music that I probably was listening to while I was writing that session. So I put hype music out for every episode. I did it all through Terra and Treefell, which is all dark country, Blue Saraceno, all that stuff was on there. Some stuff from Holzer, a few other artists that are on there, and I'll be doing the same thing for this one. It'll be slightly different genre, but I do that, and that way my players can have something they can listen to before the next session that'll get them. In the right mood or right mindset.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat here. We got a bunch of good conversation happening between people. But it's interesting, VTAC, you're saying that you love portraying goblins for some reason. It's weird. I find myself doing the same. Like, you wouldn't think a goblin should have much, but I think because they're just so, like, meh, it's a goblin, you can feel really free to just go all the way with them. Like, be really dynamic, very, like, loud or silly or... Yeah, they're interesting,
And I think it's I can agree because there's actually I think compelling because people have certain expectations of them, and it's always really fun to defy expectations for me. And in fact, like I do this a lot when I'm DMing. I don't like to portray things in a way that people expect. It's one of the reasons I like Eberron as a setting, because the monstrous races are not necessarily just monstrous. You know, they are. You see a goblin on the road with a weapon. Your first response shouldn't be to shoot him in the face. As in another setting, it very much is just, it's a goblin on the road with a weapon, shoot him. Mm-hmm. And so, having those different things to be able to play with, I really enjoy. You can have a lot of fun doing that and kind of getting people to think outside of what they normally expect from a D&D game. Mm-hmm.
Now, that's an interesting one, too, because I find a lot of us that are kind of old school and that we've been playing for a long time, we like to kind of get in those situations where we're getting out of the tropes and getting out of the expectations, because for us it is, something we've encountered hundreds of times. But, of course, there is kind of a window in there where you do need some familiarity. And it's a line to straddle. It's like... you need that trope every once in a while to come kind of fly in because it becomes novel again.
I'm going to actually counter Jeff's point a little bit.
Oh, okay.
What we're seeing a lot now, and if you're in the Twitter, you will see there was some heated debate about this not too long ago involving orcs and half-orcs.
Oh, yeah.
People are seriously getting away from the tropes, and it's not the old school players who've been doing it for a long time that are at the front of that push. It's new players coming in, looking at this and saying, well, why are you treating that humanoid race like this? Just the very concept of race in general is being kind of broken down. And a lot of these newer games, Pathfinder 2's, Yhander, they're going towards this more ancestral approach. And it's something I talked to my players in Horror and Handbook about after we got done doing character creation yesterday, was that, and my DM does this, and this is not any slight on him because he's been doing it for so long, but all his dwarves, depending on if they're hill or mountain, either have Scottish or Russian accents, depending on where they come from as their own thus dialects. And that's perfectly fine. The moment he drops in the one, he's a dwarf, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But my approach for my game world I'm building is that everyone's individual. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to apply a certain accent to every dwarf you come across because they're all individual. In the same way, not every human has the same accent.
Yeah.
For them, maybe you're more regional. If you want to say this region has it, that's fine. But across an entire planet, and so you're seeing the same thing with if you talk about goblins, you shouldn't pull a weapon the moment you see a goblin, because they're actually player races in about half of the settings anymore.
Well,
but nonetheless, it's come a long way because people are pushing against that notion that they should be treated that way to begin with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There are some issues that come up in there. I do think that there are, cultural things. If you do have a regional culture, say, when you're talking to somebody from the Midwest, right? There are certain things that come up. Not everybody from the Midwest is the same, but there are certain things that are regional, that are societal, that are kind of baked in. I think where the real issues come up is when some of the races are coded. It's this is the black people, or, this is the Mexicans, in a racial form,
right.
And that's where it gets really ugly really fast. And there is a lot of that baked into some of the old games,
Right.
So,
and that's where you have to be careful of that familiarity you're looking for, because that familiarity is probably going back onto that trope, because that's where the trope came from. So that's what I'm saying. That's where this new push coming in that's breaking a lot of that up. It's not the old school players who are used to the trope. It's the new school players who are introducing themselves to it.
Yeah, and I will, the language thing or the accent thing, I will treat that as a real thing in pretty much all my games, for sure. And some of it does irk me from just this has been done 1,000 times. The Scottish dwarf thing, I'm it's like every game. It kind of annoys me, and it also annoys me because I can't do a Scottish accent. So then I'm why can't the dwarves be German? Come on,
right?
But I do tend to make it more of a regional thing if I'm going to do an accent, and sometimes I don't do them at all, and I'll just it's just a mode of speech or slang that they use or something. But I very much think that, and I kind of forgot a little bit where I was going.
I do this all the time.
I do very much think that, this is why I like certain settings like Eberron that does try to start getting out of some of those tropes a little bit with different races and stuff. And they don't completely get out of it. But they do start to break away a little bit and go, goblins are not all bloodthirsty killers. They are a little bit chaotic. That is their culture. But, they're not necessarily evil. Right. They're player races and stuff. And so, I will still use some of those tropes sometimes. I will freely admit. So, one of the first encounters that my group had in my current game was they got ambushed by some goblin brigands. And this was, and that's something I use, and it's kind of stereotypical, but there are some of those tropes that I do enjoy sometimes because they are classic D&D. It's like having the classic bar brawl. There's some of those things that just, they're traditional. Fighting mimics. I love just throwing mimics out at people. I adore it. It's lovely. I
don't know if we've ever fought a mimic in any of our games.
Old school, we fought some cloakers.
We fought cloakers, but not mimics.
But I do like to, anytime I do that, I try to make sure that at some point I'm counterbalancing it with other examples. Like for instance, I have, I had that session. That was something that happened, but I do also have like a goblin NPC that I want to bring in the near future that is very much not an evil character to kind of helping to show that, okay, yeah, sure, there might be some goblin brigands, but that doesn't mean goblins are brigands. It means just there were some brigands here, there were goblins. There are also some brigands over here that are humans that you're going to fight. There's some other things going on. But then there's perfectly functional goblin society over here that's having no problems.
One of the things I started moving closer towards, and Zweiner makes this easy on me because it's already kind of built in that way, is that most cities, places are not single ancestry, single culture to begin with. So when you come across the brigands, it's a goblin, a human, and an ogre brigand. It's not necessarily just one group. And if you kind of head with that mindset, then you can break a lot of the problems before it starts when it comes to the tropes to a degree.
I think one of the reasons some of those things get to be problems in D&D is not just because of tradition, but also because of the quantity of low-level mobs in D&D. They're goblins, skeletons, zombies, orcs,
kobolds. Yay!
It's mostly this one classification of goblinoid creatures and a couple of undead and stuff and a couple of beasts. And then you're like, oh, what else am I going to throw at them? Unless I want to go homebrew stuff for our level 2 encounter that honestly we're not going to be at this level for very long. Do I really want to homebrew stuff for it? And I think that could be part of the problem. It's certainly not to say that the system itself is the blame here. It's on the DMs to vary things up and to break out of that. But the system doesn't always help.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to some of the source material, of course. When you got something that's based around an IP like Lord of the Rings, where the goblins and the orcs are evil, period. There are no examples of orcs or goblins that are not evil. That is, their species is an evil race.
And I hate that. I hate when something's pre-canon and alignment.
And it's not only that their species or their race is that way. You literally see the creation rites that went through creating it to be that way. That's where it gets. They're not even a true species at that point.
Well, I think where the issue really comes up is when you're talking about intelligent creatures, right? I think at that point that's where it gets weird, because I think we can all be okay with all skeletons are evil, right? Who cares, right? Right. Or a cloaker is always, I can't remember what a cloaker is, probably neutral, but something that is not thought of as an intelligent, deep character potentially. We're okay with just slapping an alignment on and saying that's just how it is, or a magical construct or something like Malice is saying. But I think as soon as it becomes an intelligent, sentient creature, then it starts to rub some of us now the wrong way. I can't think of any other examples outside of that it rubbed me the wrong way necessarily.
But one of the things that irritates, first anything with kind of a hard pre-canned alignment, this is always evil, this is always that, kind of annoys me. But I have been known and I actually did this in a game not too long ago, to throw in a demon that was not good, but was not necessarily like uber evil either. And and I very much had it be a possibility that like the player characters could influence some of the moral choices of this being. It was not necessarily trying to kind of drill in like, and they were, they're very much just like, oh, it's a demon, it's evil. But then like through story interactions, like, well, they were very much influencing how evil the thing was. And it's like, trying to be like, okay, it can have kind of an evil culture. That does not necessarily mean that it has to do evil. Even if that's how its society kind of is organized, what does that mean it has to be in there? Especially if, again, you're saying I tend to identify evil as being self-interested and self-focused. Okay. And then I'm like, okay, if you put it in a place where it's not necessarily in power, it's not necessarily in its benefit to be evil. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good, but it might tip into neutral, even if it's just out of self-preservation. That doesn't mean it's going to be sitting there like, how do I betray them at the first opportunity? No, I mean, and especially if over time you can build relationships of a certain degree, and even partnerships, perhaps. Maybe that's viable.
I think what happens with intelligent creatures and where the problem is that the moment that you make them a sentient race of some sort that you're going to put somewhere in your world, the next thing you have to do is decide how they live. And what you're going to be drawn to do is to reflect something that you know. Yeah. Not that you lived, but that you know. So are they going to be tribal? And if you're going to go tribal, what kind of tribe are you going to mimic? It's probably going to be a real life tribe of some sort that you're now going to mimic. And now you're into that problem. With D&D, there's no problem with something being evil because they're evil gods. So it explains itself pretty easily. You're following an evil god. It's not a monotheistic system. There are going to be people who follow evil gods. That's why evil gods exist. The problem is then when you have to then say, well, how do those evil people live? And what does their life look like? And the moment you start to do that, that's when you'll start to fall into some issues of, well, okay, I can't go down those roads. Like I got to break away from those ideas. I got to redesign this or rethink how it works, because otherwise you'll find yourself in a spot.
And I think one of the issues is, you see this with people making evil characters. Like someone wants to play an evil character or play an evil campaign even, which I have done before. And, we kind of go into it and say, like, just bear in mind, it's a real person. There are some evil people. They don't necessarily have to be super villain evil. They're just very self-focused. They want themselves to prevail over other people. They may even be willing to hurt other people, which would make them evil. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do so at every opportunity. It doesn't mean they're going to out themselves as evil. But when it comes to portraying these evil races, we kind of throw that out the window sometimes and go like, no, they're crazy evil orcs. They're going to maim and burn cities and stuff because that's what they do. And it's like, wait, why would they risk themselves? Like there has to be something they're gaining out of this. They're not just going to do it for no reason. And so maybe their culture, maybe the culture of this area is what other people might define as evil. Maybe it's super authoritarian, or maybe it's kind of very self-focused and all about their personal gain and triumph over other people. And so by general moral standards, we might consider it to be evil, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are always going to attack people on sight. They may they may still do trade. They may still benefit. I mean, we've certainly had like some evil governments and things at various times in history that still got along with their neighbors at certain points.
True. Yeah, it's interesting because another one of our early episodes, first episode in fact, was Dustin and I arguing about whether alignment was a good thing for the game or not. And I think this is where I run into it the most, is that like as soon as you label it as there are elemental evil beings called demons, that you're not allowed to do these interesting things because it goes against what that thing is by the definition of the game.
And it messes with how some classes function and certain spells function. And other, like, hey, evil outsider, I can detect demons because they're evil outsider. Well, now all of a sudden you can't detect a demon because it's not an evil outsider. Like, you start playing with tropes on how, start messing with things, and all of a sudden things don't function like they're supposed to.
And that is one thing I do like about 5e, because they tend to specify the actual races you detect regardless of alignment.
Right.
Yeah, alignment doesn't play into it. Yeah, and I think eventually that's just going to go away entirely. Like there is no reason to have the alignment system, as I will gladly argue again. I mean, it's nice to have something to prompt a player to think about their character's motivations, but I don't find the alignment system to be a good tool for that. Whereas I think some of these other things we're seeing, like bonds and personality traits and ideals and that sort of stuff, really are working in the right direction to get that stuff.
I think alignment in its history, again, always goes back to cosmology. And the one thing that I think that people playing in D&D specifically, and in a lot of fantasy realms, forget, is that the gods are bound to alignments. They hold those as domains. And a lot of these creatures are allegedly created in those gods' image. Whether it's Gurmish creating the orcs, this, that, the other. And it gets you into some of these tropes and issues. But the reason why they're chaotic is because Gurmish holds the domain of chaos. There you go. That's why they're chaotic. If they do chaos, they are rewarded for it. Where in a monotheistic type society that we most live in, whether you're religious or not, only good things are thus rewarded in the way that you think of in the afterlife. But in a D&D setting, everyone walking around in that world understands the people doing bad stuff are going to be rewarded for the things that they're doing too, because their evil gods are going to reward them in the afterlife for it. And so it's a very different dichotomy of you're worshiping different forces. And so that's a very hard thing to break then away from. But then you have to figure out how to break the tropes at the same time of don't shoehorn the idea that evil religion looks exactly like this religion from our world. You have to make it its own thing.
I do think you're right about that, but I do also think that it's almost like a self-fulfilling sort of thing. Like, they could simply remove the alignments from the deities, and then that fixes the problem.
Ding.
If they, because they have themes, they have things that they are the deities over. They are the deity of war, or the deity of and simply having that, and maybe even adding descriptive text of the type of war or whatever that they are the deity of, could perhaps supplant that. Now, I'm not necessarily entirely against the alignment system. I do think that it has mostly been useful, in my opinion, in character creation, primarily for people who aren't super experienced in tabletop gaming. Yeah. To get in there and go, oh, here's my alignment. That helps me figure out what I'm going to play and what I'm going to portray and what I'm going to do. And I think that's its general purpose. And I do think you need something to accomplish that. But it's very possible that they could have something that's not as problematic that would accomplish the same thing.
Yeah. You could go with the other types of things. Like, well, here's a god of murder. But he's totally not evil. But you all know darn well that he's evil. You could take the evil label off of him, but the truth is you're going to end up in the same spots, because then you're going to say, well, he's a god of murder. So how come this culture, this trope, is doing all the murdering? Now you're making the same associations to X, Y, or Z, goblins, orcs, whatever, that you were already making before. You're just not calling them evil, but you're calling them evil. So you're working around it to a degree, but at the same point in time, as long as there's a pantheon, and those pantheons are creating beings underneath them to carry out their wills, you're going to end up in those same situations of having to be very careful about how you portray them in a game.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting place because there's a lot of gray area in every topic, right? And even that murder definition, you could spin it in a way that would be like, my order hunts down and destroys a certain class of criminal. So my god of murder is about murdering this type of criminal, and that suddenly has a weird bent to it that isn't clearly evil.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the setting. like what setting you're playing in and what that setting is intended to be. Because some settings are much more religious than others. You have some things where that is hard-coded. This deity created this race and is the main deity over this race. Then you have ones like Eberron where that's very much not the case. And religion is often portrayed more esoterically, and there may not be any direct connection or communication with different deities and stuff. And then, that's going to vary between settings. And so and I kind of, to some degree, prefer that. It does, because it allows people to gravitate towards settings that they like for those various reasons. Some people really like having characters with that strong religious tie to a deity and having those sort of hard delineations in that. I tend to like having lots of gray areas where the deities are not clearly defined. Their motives may not even be understood, but people just assign things to them and say, this is what they do. Yeah. And is that necessarily the case? You don't know, but it's what you believe. So go with that.
Yeah, and that is, I think you're seeing some of the newer systems coming out are heading that direction with their pantheons. They're not labeling them as good or evil, and most of them will tell you that there's not even a single benevolent deity in the whole pantheon. Like now you're getting more into like the Greek gods. Mm-hmm. Zeus, was he a good dude? I don't know. He did keep a certain amount of law and order. He also had a whole lot of other personal problems. You make at that point, you're making your deities very human in a way. They have a lot of human traits. So when you hit that level, then you're able to play with it more. And that's historically where the pantheons in a lot of the D&D settings have issues, and where some of these things come back to.
Yeah, and I think that does play a lot into defining what your world is. Like what style you're going with is as far as how nuanced it is, and how I'm dancing around this concept and I cannot figure out a way to word it. You could feel a lot from a pantheon. Like whether your world is like the Greek style where it's gods are flawed, or are they supposed to be these perfect incarnations of X, Y, or Z? It's interesting from game world to game world, or how important the gods should be at all.
I definitely think you can tell a lot about a game setting by how they treat the pantheon and how they lay it out. Because even if the gods in the pantheon aren't that important, that says something about that they're not that detailed. That says something about the setting and how the religion is treated in there.
Yeah, imagine a D&D world where the clerics and paladins and such still exist, and they still cast magic, but there is no confirmation of any gods existing. But they have their religious orders all the same.
Yeah. And some people like to play it that way already anyway.
Yeah. I think it would be a pretty interesting take on it, because I think the default style of Dungeons & Dragons is, of course, everyone knows that, so-and-so is the god of blah, 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 and they do this, and this happens every day, and, we've seen him. He just shows up sometimes, and...
Well, it's hard when, a third to half of your classes cast quote-unquote divine magic, and you can't deny that it's true. I always joke, in a D&D world, there's no atheist. It's nearly impossible, because everybody's going to walk over there to some cleric of whoever, doesn't matter which deity it is. He's going to wave his hand, it's going to glow blue, and your wounds are going to seal up. You can't walk away from that being yep, still don't believe.
Whatever, wizard. Whatever, healing wizard. Get out of here.
Right.
Yeah.
Take your book away.
That's true. It's very much true. Even in, again, I keep using Eberron as an example because it's kind of one of those examples of a newer setting that does break away from some of that hard definition and hard examples of gods being very involved. But even in something like that, you can't deny there's a cleric and he can resurrect someone from the dead. Mm-hmm. So you have to, I very much go into it going clearly the gods exist.
Yeah.
And yet they don't really necessarily talk to people. That doesn't necessarily mean they talk to people or that you understand what they want, or do they even really particularly care? Are you some weird leech that somehow siphons power off of them, whether they know or care at all? who knows? And that's very much even in other settings how I like to play it. I will sometimes like bring in deities, and I might even have someone like the most interaction I usually come to is with between like a deity and a person is they may have like a vision or something or a dream that suggests something. I pretty much never go to like the level where like they're conversing. I'm like, you're just not that important to the deity. I'm sorry.
You hit a level with cleric and they get divine intervention like once a day. It's like, well, okay, fine. Or they, I think what was it, augury? They used to have augury spells where it was like, hey, deity, is it baneful or not to do this? And you had to answer them because that was the spell. It was part of their character class. So you didn't have a choice. You had to answer as that god. Yes, it's fine to go that direction.
You get a good feeling.
Right. You get a good feeling about it. So there was positive confirm that there's something out there at a higher level.
Maybe. You don't necessarily have to give it the voice of the deity. You could just have a vision. And
you feel positive about this area.
The spells literally say that, but
Well, you know what else is literal right now is that we're at the 10-minute left in the episode. Somehow happens very quickly. We need to make sure that we properly plug your content here, my friend. So this is your opportunity. The soapbox is clear. Dustin and I will be silent. What do you have to share?
All right. Thank you. First, thanks for having me on here. It's been fun. I always love talking tabletop and getting an opportunity to do that. And we went over a lot of stuff. But for anybody that wants to listen to me ramble for some reason about other tabletop stuff, I do have a podcast show that I do every other Wednesday night, including this Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the Smart Gamer Network channel. It's called Masks and Mimicry. We talk about different tabletop games and tabletop gaming with a little bit. We try to keep it somewhat focused on role-playing and the more performative aspects of it, but we vary around at times. And this week we're going to part 2 of a series of 3 podcasts talking about creating specifically D&D characters, specifically talking about creating interesting role-play characters and kind of the backgrounds and the flaws and different quirks and mannerisms and things that make them interesting to play.
And who's we?
My co-host Brand and I host it every other Wednesday.
And where do they find that at?
Smart Gamer Network, which is twitch.tv/Smart Gamer Network.
Awesome. Yeah, it's we got a lot of friends over there. Yeah, he did.
Do what?
You got the time there? Okay. I didn't catch the time, so.
We can do it again, though.
Just making sure he got all the relevant info in there.
Double plug. Yeah, no, that's an interesting topic. I think we had talked about possibly talking about flaws, and we kind of... So we'll have to tune in.
We flirted with them. We sidestepped right around them, so we'll get the flaws another time.
We can go back to Vampire and really break into the whole chapter. I mean,
yeah,
absolutely, man. It's some good stuff, and you guys are doing a lot of content over there on the Smart Gamer Network. So obviously we got Malice hanging out in the chat with us too from over there, and we appreciate you guys coming and hanging out in our chat with a lot of our programs, and obviously thank you so very much for joining us tonight. It was a wonderful conversation.
Pleasure being here.
Yeah, absolutely. We usually reserve the 10 minutes because our outro situation of us plugging the things we're doing during the week is a long spiel. So, Dustin, would you like to start us off on that?
I feel like as this goes along, I've become more and more like the Micro Machines guy, where I can rattle these off in like less than 5 minutes now. But tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Central Time, because we do everything at Central Time, here at TT2KB, you will find our man Cameron, that's Resin Hana in the chat if he's still around, and he does a show called Bardic Knowledge where he makes music for our tabletop role-playing games because we like original music for our stuff because copyrights suck when you're trying to use music. So they're either get very expensive very quickly, but we're very lucky to have very talented people here at TT2KB. We have artists and musicians, and we put them to work. And Cameron will be doing that tomorrow, 8 p.m. Wednesday night, you can show up here about 10 p.m. And Jeff's going to kill everyone but me because I won't be here. But Jeff will be, and he's running the Pathfinder 2nd edition. It's the Fall of Plague Stone. We have a fantastic group of characters that will not see the light of day come Thursday. So come watch us die horrific deaths. I mean, I'm going to watch Vellic instead because he's not killing my characters. But from work, I might tune in to see whether or not I live. We'll see. but that'll be Wednesday, 10 p.m. Thursday night, 10 p.m. It'll be 7 Days to Die. We started a new server. We just turned Jeff and Clint loose in there on like a 24-hour work cycle, and I think we already have Fort Knox and like a skyrise built or something.
We don't have any defenses actually. It's just
they
all
just have really nice stuff for the zombies to destroy come Horde night. So
Clint put a bunch of
you'll have to
couches
tune in and see what they've been working on Thursday night at 10 p.m. I may or may not be back for that one in time. We'll see. Friday, we don't stream on Fridays here. Our mod, Air Laser, her group runs on Fridays. So over at Air Laser's channel, you'll be able to see Lost Mines of Fandelver. They're running through that module. So check them out on Fridays. I think it's like 5 p.m. Central Time. Am I right on that? I think
she'll hit us up in the chat here in a few minutes.
She'll toss it in the chat here in a second. This coming Saturday is an off week for us, but the following Saturday you will find us back for Everstorm, our 5e high fantasy homebrew world that our DM Levi runs. And I would love to tell you if the next episode is going to be Bowron's Bogus Journey, but I'm the player Bowron and I don't even know yet. So
really hope
you just have to come find out what happened to Bowron at the end of last episode.
Maybe a weird situation.
Episode. We don't know. It's one of those situations where I decided to throw the DM for a loop, and now I don't know if Levi even knows what he's going to do. But
we should say what happened real quick, because in a nutshell, we were in this fight. Weird shit was going down. Ballroom decides to Misty Step into a box on this creature's back, which is clearly intended to, basically capture and take away one of the other PCs. The thing gets up and starts walking away, Doc Ock style, with him in it, and is basically like suppressing any spells he has or shape-changing abilities. So he's actually just stuck in there. And then our arcane archer shoots an arrow at it that has the banishment spell on it, and banishes the weird creature with Balrin in it to the Feywild, where things are cool for a second, and then Balrin decides, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to cast Dispel Magic on the cage. And
then I walk out of it.
Gets left in the Feywild.
And then the box disappears because banishment ends, and I'm standing in the Feywild.
And this all started off because we were in a dream world induced by his spell. He's the only one that can get us there.
Druids have fun stuff.
So now we can't even go to the dream world to find out where he went to figure out how to go to the Feywild to get to him back. So I don't know what's happening. Balrin's just gone in the Feywild.
It's a whole other level of separation, and it's like the movie Inception at this point. We went into a dream from another dream, and who knows if I come back out in one piece or not. We'll find out next Everstorm game. And then again, Monday. In 2 weeks, Horror and Huttenberg on Sundays will be kicking off. Chapter 1 for my new Zweihander game, Horror and Huttenberg. It is the sequel to last year's Terror and Treefell, which I did reference a few times tonight. Those are all on YouTube. You can find all episodes of Wisdom Check, everything else on YouTube. We put all of our stuff up there. Bardic Knowledge, DM to Art. I don't know if Levi's doing any DM to Art this week. He hasn't told us. But if you're in our Discord, that's where Levi will tell you when DM to Art's going to happen. So it'll be there. You just join our Discord and keep an eye out. But Horror and Huttenberg will be taking place in a couple of weeks for game session number 1. It is chapter 1, which I retitled today to Drive It Like You Stole It, because my entire character creation process for Zweihander left me with 5 criminals.
Yep.
Essentially. So
it's pretty amazing.
They're going to be doing criminal things, apparently. And that's what you can tune in for Zweihander in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. And who's our guest for next week?
You would ask such difficult questions, Jeff.
I would like to switch over and look at it myself, but I will destroy the overlay in the process. And it is a little rough for the audience.
Funny thing, we were just talking about that Zweihander game because one of my players, Alexander Wrights 91, who is playing in that Zweihander game, is one of my players. He's going to be here next week, and he's going to be talking about his new project, the Untold Stories Project, which is a stream group that he is starting up, and some of the cool stuff that he's been writing on. I think he even said it's based on his own set of novels that he's got published. So We're going to hear a lot about his novels, the game world that's come out of it, the new stream he's got set up. We're going to be talking, and this is officially our first repeat guest will be Alexander, right? He was on talking about, he was a writer for Mutants and Masterminds as well. If you're familiar with that TTRPG, he was on last year in season 1 of Wisdom Check. So
very cool.
That is where.
Whew. So we're done with all of our plots. I think.
Hey, look, 1 minute left, Jeff. I did it.
Very well done.
Oh, wait, nope. We do have one left, Jeff. Talk about your dad.
Yep, that's true. The last one up is check out these links I'm about to post in there. Boom. My dad is the artist David Lee Pancake. He does a lot of sculpting. In particular, he likes to do fantasy elements like dragons. And as you should expect, conventions are not a thing this year, and that is his primary means of selling his artwork. So he is converting to the online world with Patreon, Twitch, and YouTube. And he's been doing live streams, including live streams on Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, where he is sculpting our characters from our D&D game. And it's pretty awesome.
Super cool. He's almost got Kodo done, I think, and it's looking amazing.
Thanks, VTAG. Appreciate that. So yeah, definitely go check that out. If you're able to show some support, we would really appreciate it. It goes a long way. And with that, I think we have officially exhausted every possible plug we could potentially think of. I want to once again say thank you very much for joining me and Dustin here tonight, Vellic. And thank you to the audience for hanging out with us here while we kind of figure out where we're going next.
Are you looking for a raid target, Jeff? I might be able to help you out with one of those.
I think it would be pretty good. Yeah, it would be nice. Let's figure out where we're going here.
You know, the list of channels that I've followed on TT2KB is getting quite extensive. So going down the list is taking a little longer than it used to.
Oh, yeah.
Man, all right. You know what? Let's drop in on... What? Gathering of Nerds is playing Vampire the Masquerade. Oh, that's it. That's where we're going tonight.
All right.
It being Vellic's favorite game. That's what we're going to go do here.
That's fantastic. I'm going to switch this to the thanks for watching sign, and then we'll see you over there.
Hang around about 10 seconds here.